Oh man. All right. So I just got off the podcast with our guest, Josh Smith, and my head's still spinning. I'm trying to recover here. We talked about all things related to robots and AI. I guess I should give a little bio here of Josh. Josh is a theologian and pastor researching the ethics of AI and robotics. He's the co-chair of the Kirby Laing Center's Technology Hub and the author of the book we're going to talk about, Robot Theology, Old Questions Through New Media. He got a PhD and at Midwestern Seminary in I think in St. Louis is where it's at. And I don't know Josh. I saw him. I saw his book. We connected on social media, and I said, "Dude, this looks interesting. Let's talk about it." And this was a fascinating conversation. I asked a lot of stupid questions. We did get into some racy stuff the last half when it comes to sex robots. That's a touchy, sensitive category. And so if you're not ready for that, then just listen to the first half. And we talk a lot of stuff about a lot of stuff not related to sex robots in the first half. So anyway, without further ado, my goodness, let's dive into this conversation with the one and only Dr. Josh Smith. All right, hey friends, welcome back to another episode of Theology in the Raw. I'm here with Josh Smith, author of Robot Theology. So I just want to say, all right, go. But give us a background. Who are you? What do you do? And then what got you into wanting to understand robot theology and AI and this whole world that I know hardly anything about? I'm sure. Yeah. Tell us about how you got into it, and that'll take us, I'm sure, in many different directions.
Yeah, it's kind of a long story, but I'll try to make it quick. So I'm from Mississippi, and I'm a Southern boy. Grew up here, been to other places, was in the military for a while. But in high school, I got into robotics. Programmed a little bit for the Nissan factory just up the road. Well, I'm in Colorado today, but up the road from where I grew up. And I just got fascinated by the machinery. It's just one of those things that you kind of either you're really freaked out by it, or you embrace it and you're comfortable with it. And I guess I was. And so, I wanted to study that more, but there wasn't any programs college-wise that I could get into or afford. I had a really terrible GPA in high school. I was kind of a burnout and slacker. So I joined the military. So I guess that was a logical thing to do.
Is that where slackers go, to the military?
Yeah, man, I'm telling you, it's a strange place. But yeah, I joined because of the bonus money, GI Bill, and so I haven't paid for a single degree that I have, and actually, my wife, even her graduate school was paid for.
Wow.
But anyway, I worked with some systems there that were semi-autonomous defensive weapon systems, like a big R2-D2 robot with a 20 millimeter gun on the bottom of it.
Really?
It's really.
Can you semi-autonomous? And by the way, I try not to do this, but I might have to. If I hear something that I don't quite understand, I might jump in, cut you off real quick, and have you define it. So I hope that doesn't destroy your train of thought. But semi-autonomous.
No, it's fine.
Yeah.
It's a combination of human and human in the loop or on the loop. So we're always, basically the DoD policy is a human will always be in the loop. So it's not going to make a decision, even though it can use LiDAR, which is the image reckoning system that captures everything. It just looks like a big scope, if you're familiar with rifles or anything like that.
Yeah.
And it can engage the targets by itself, right? It didn't need the human operator. And so there are a bunch of us who sat in a room all day and watched screens, and it would light up and say, hey, I think this is a potential target. And then it would alert the operator, hey, do you want to fire or not? And so that's what I mean. It didn't, like the tracking systems and stuff were the autonomous part. Okay, if that makes sense. It's not like it made a decision by itself to engage. It's just, and even with, as we get into more advanced in the conversation with AI and stuff, it's always these mathematical, evaluative decision-making processes. Now, that doesn't mean consciousness or anything like that. It's just, been programmed to recognize certain patterns. It's really good at that, and it does that. And so that's about the extent of autonomy.
So this R2D2 with a machine gun, like you would say, here's a target, kind of punch a button and he's going to go, and then you have to punch another button to actually shoot? Or do you just say, all right, there's a target, do your work, and you're kind of standing back, making sure R2 doesn't turn around and shoot the wrong person or something? Or
there's both systems. So the ones that's used by Israeli defense, they have some that will just loiter around. And so they go into the sky and they're all on their own, right? They decide when to engage and when to, attack.
Like it's like a really drone that's not actually being operated by somebody. It's just kind of doing a circuit.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Ours were always piloted in a sense. Okay. So, and it's not just one human, right? There's multiple. So we had the Navy with us. Like we're kind of getting to the weeds now.
Yeah.
We had the Navy with us, and they would monitor the weapon system. We would monitor the weapon system. And then it's just, there's so many different components to, it's not just one machine out on its own, doing its own thing. There's always multiple humans that are evaluating its evaluation.
So. Okay. All right. So going back to your journey. So this is what you did in the military. Then take us from there.
Yeah. So I did my PhD at Midwestern in Kansas City. Mm-hmm. And I've always been a sci-fi person, nerd, comic books, whatever. Huge Batman fan. But unrelated to that, I was watching a couple different shows while I was doing some potential research for class. And I wanted to do something on AI and robots, particularly around like, what does it mean to be a person? What does it mean to be human? And so one of my professors said that would be really interesting because I'm really tired of reading the same papers over and over and over. He said, so please do something. And I really wanted to do like warfare, mechanized warfare and stuff like that. But he was like, why don't you do like sex robots or something like that? I don't remember quite all the details of it, but it was like, I don't really want to do that research, but I did. And I'm grateful for it because it really pushed me, not just in sexual ethics, but like, when you think about shows like Westworld and the BBC Channel 4 series, Humans, which is a better version, in my opinion. They're asking questions about what does it mean to be human? How do machines relate to God? They're asking questions about idolatry. They don't use that language, but that's what they're talking about. And so I got into the literature, which is very broad and strange. And then I was like, man, there's not a very conservative theological perspective on these issues. It's always like something either Buddhist or, some crazy, just kind of, far left theologian who I respect. And I'm not saying that they're, they haven't done the work or anything, but it's just not a conclusion that I would reach about Jesus. Mm-hmm. And so I wanted to do something faithful, both to biblical theology and systematic theology, and try to bring in my perspective of Scripture and, wrestle with the text, even though, the Bible doesn't talk about AI and robots, but it does talk about the questions behind why we create some of those entities. And so that's what I tried to do in my work. And I wrote a couple papers on that. It turned into my dissertation, and I finished that. I graduated in 2020 and went on to do some more research. And so I wanted to broaden it out more, and that's what led to this book with Whiffenstock. So, yeah.
Can you give us a somewhat of a brief, not too brief, but not too long summary of what is robot theology? Like you even said, like the scriptures don't speak directly to this, obviously, but it does give us principles through which we should evaluate these modern questions and categories. I'm not even sure what modern questions or categories I'm supposed to ask. I mean, this is how new all of this is to me. So give us a kind of 101 version of how we should think.
Yeah, well, for me, I always try to approach topics like I want to go to some text in Scripture and try to figure out, okay, what is the underlying theme? What is the theology that's being presented in the Bible? And then how do I apply that to, systematic issues? So what I did is, or what robot theology is just looking at robots, AI, from a biblical and theological perspective. That's what I mean by that. It's not, so I'm trying to make a category for it. I'm not really quite sure where it fits. I'm trying to take biblical theology because that's that was my heart, an Old Testament guy, and kind of marry that to some systematics, but not go straight towards systematic and just say, we're not going to do any Bible, we're not going to do any ancient Near Eastern context or anything like that. So I try to marry the two. I don't know if I do it well, but I try to let the theology of the Bible kind of drive my conversation about my theology of robots and the extent of where that could go or can't go. So
okay. So what are some theological questions we need to be asking?
Yeah, I think the biggest one right now is, what does it mean to be human?
Okay.
And the AI ethics community is picking up on this, and it's kind of coming from like what separates us from animals, like the moral consideration for animals. So the animal rights movement is very closely tied to the robot rights movement. And as far as like, no, it's not quite a human or a Homo sapien, but maybe we should consider it morally. And so that's kind of where you have to start in a lot of ways with some of these conversations. Other issues that I address in the work is robots and racism. That's a big part of the literature.
Robots and racism.
Yes, sir.
How? I don't understand how those are related.
Yeah. Okay. So robot in the Czech means forced labor. Okay. So there's a long line of literature that looks at robots as a reimagined slave. Okay. So if you go back, and there's several authors, Gregory Hampton is a good one to look at. He wrote a small book on reimagining slaves. And he just looked at different movies, the animatrix series, if you're interested. There's all these imageries of the black body, even Blade Runner. So the female that you're not quite sure whether or not she's a robot or not, she very much should have been a black woman. She should have been played by a black woman, because the theory is that, those in power can use other people's bodies as they please. Yeah. So if you think about slavery, chattel slavery, that's what it is, right? It's an economically driven decision to make someone less than, to exploit them for economic reasons, and to use this rationale. Well, they're not really like us; they're not really human, so it doesn't matter if we treat them as property. And those arguments are very similar in the robot rights literature. It's
robot, right?
You see it. Yeah. So like there's an article, and you can Google this, robots should be slaves. Yes, that's the title of it. Okay. And that's the argument. And so if you ask people in this field and the people that have written on this are not white people. Okay. So it's not just a bunch of white guys who are like, robots are like slaves, but this is how they're experiencing and understanding how they're imaged in science fiction, and even in, modern cultivation of robots as, a mammy. I mean, that's what Rosie was from the Jetsons, right? She was a mammy. And so there's many different examples of that. And so even if you go all the way back to the 1920s with Karl Koppig's RUR, which is Russell's Universal Robots, that's where we get the word robot from. It's about this question of, would robots want to be their own masters? Would they want to be free or not? And he says, yes, they would want to be free. They eventually don't want to be slaves. And so the question is, should we make something to be for service?
I'm going to ask some stupid questions because I'm not obviously in the loop. It's so obvious that I feel bad. I feel like dumb asking it, but like if, like there's no moral agency in a robot, or no like if I made a baseball bat and I use that baseball bat to hit balls with it, what's the difference between that and if I make a machine that has no conscience, no whatever, and use it to do whatever I want it to do? Yeah. I have another question about sex robots, but we're going to save that for a little bit.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, that's a good question. That's a good, fair question.
What am I missing? Is it just, it's obviously it's more intelligent than a baseball bat, but is intelligence even the right term? I don't know. Cooler
Yeah,
than a
yeah, no,
baseball.
it's good. A lot of people a lot of people go there like it's just a tool, right?
Yeah.
I wouldn't think twice about destroying a toaster or if you wreck a car, you're not really destroying a living entity, and that's not quite the argument that
Okay.
people are making. The argument is, what does it do to the human? Because for example, if we had a humanoid looking robot that we know absolutely 100% is not conscious, sentient,
Hmm.
whatever you want to, fill in the blank with, okay, that really doesn't matter as much because you beating that robot in public would cause a disturbance, would it not?
Hmm.
Think about it now if it's a
You're talking about
child.
like a human looking, like if it looks human, which, but if it was
Mhm.
like, wait, okay, sorry, I'm just my wheels are turning and they're a little slow right now. So is it because there's some sort of connection, some sort of personification that's attempted here of another human? Um, I guess unless the robot looked like R2D2 or something, I don't know. Like,
Well,
is
there's
that
been
the
studies
issue?
done
Because it
that,
could reshape how we think about the human that this robot is sort of mimicking. Like again, so if I made a robot that looks very
yeah.
human, painted it say a darker color, a non-white human, and then treated it like a slave, in and of itself, that would maybe raise questions. But it's more the gosh, what signal is this sending? What is this doing to my own view of humans that this robot is trying to imitate or
Yeah.
whatever? Like that is that the
Yeah. Yeah, you're
okay.
getting it. You got it.
Okay.
You're not far off. Basically, and this is a Kantian principle that if a man kicks a dog, right, what does it say about the man?
Hmm.
Okay. And this definitely will get into sex robots later. But, if we make an entity that looks like us, or even if we don't, there's been studies done. Kate Darling is a researcher at MIT who had these robotic dinosaurs, like very,
Hmm.
you know, very unrealistic looking dinosaurs. And she did a study and gave people like an hour to play with them. And then after an hour, she said, okay, here's some hatchets. I want you to kill them. And they said no.
Hmm.
So, okay, well, either we kill one of them, so you, as a group decide we're going to kill one of them or we're going to kill all of them. So you guys have to decide. And there was this very somber moment where like people were like emotionally impacted by having to kill this robot. And even with like bomb disposal robots, there's been military funerals for these
Really?
entities. People's Roombas, like a Roomba, is definitely not in this moral consideration category at all. But people want the same Roomba that they had because it's like a part of their family. People name them. Um, I mean, the list just goes on and on. Like it's not a bug in humanness to care about artificial entities. I think it's put there by God that
Huh.
we care about things because all things belong to God. And this is kind of where I go in my research is that I say, well, what's the difference between kicking, a stump or a fence post or whatever? It's
Yeah.
like, well, in my theology, that doesn't belong to me. It's never a product of my own. And everything, especially something that emulates emotion. So we're talking about like social robots that things like Kismet. If you're interested, you can look that up. There's robots that are made to treat autism. There's robots that are made to treat dementia. And so they elicit a very emotional response. And so it will cause moral harm to the user if you took that robot away. And even some parents who have used those robots to treat their kids with ASD have offered very high numbers to keep those robots once they're taken away. And they can't do it because it's not their property to sell. But so I think that's just a small snippet of the research that if you bring these entities into our lives,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, just think about our cell phones.
Mm-hmm.
Cell phone can't wash the dishes. Cell phone can't, interact with the kids. I mean, it can, but not in an embodied way. And once you bring embodiment into it, I think the emotional attachments are going to be deeper. I think the moral consideration that we give them will be a lot more complex. But I also think the potential for harm is a lot greater. And so, we need to really think about those nuances there. That yes, it is a tool. Absolutely, it is. But there's also an inframing that's happening too, and
It's
how we
performing. I
make.
mean, because I'm just thinking of a range of different kinds of inanimate objects, but
Yeah,
robots are performing human functions, which again doesn't accredit consciousness or any kind of intrinsic difference between, let's say, human, animal, inanimate objects. I don't know, just categorizing it that
sure.
way. Like, it would be inanimate. I mean, at the end of the day, it's not any morally different in and of itself as a rock, a stone, a building. But it's performing human functions. But is that a key difference? And also, just we shouldn't destroy creation arbitrarily for whatever reason, especially a product of human creativity. If I build a car using my creativity that I have because I possess God's image, I'm using things in God's creation that are fulfilling a certain design, and then I just bash the heck out of it for no reason. Like, I wouldn't put that on the same level of adultery, but I mean, it'd be like, well, that just doesn't, that kind of goes against the grain of a creature trying to honor a creator in a world that he has been placed as a steward over, to just arbitrarily destroy something. How am I thinking so far? Am I correct in any thoughts I've said? Or
so? No, those are good thoughts, man. I think we get hung up on the sentience and the moral agency argument.
Okay.
But there's also another side, the moral patiency argument, and so it's
what's that moral patiency?
Like it could be an object of so it can be an object of love or care. It can't. So a moral agent can do both, right? It can give love and care, and it can receive love and care. But a moral patient is only on the receiving end. So that's kind of where I go, and I talk about this more in the book. So we kind of use that as an argument to say, okay, no, a robot, at least the ones that we have today, or an AI entity, no, it's not morally, it's not sentient, it's not the same as a human, right? Although in a lot of people's anthropology and philosophy of mind, philosophy of science, they don't really make good arguments for why that's not the case, like why it couldn't be. And I think Christian theology has a good answer to that, but that's a different line of thought. But anyway, we kind of use that to say, look, they can't have the same moral rights that we have as natural creatures, whatever you want to fill in the blank with, where they have human dignity and respect. But maybe we should consider them as moral patients, because it will potentially harm the moral agent if I have a negative relationship to this entity, which is happening, and we're not even talking about social robots yet. There's a group of guys in Japan who forego physical interactions with embodied females because they have digital girlfriends. So much so, and everybody already knows that Japan's struggling with producing another generation that's going to take care of the current generation. But there's also other cases where people are abusing their AI chatbot girlfriends. So there's one called Replica, and it's very advanced. It's an AI, and whether or not there's humans behind it or not, I don't know. But anyway, there's a group of guys, and there's an article about it recently, that are just intentionally abusing this entity. And that's completely okay, right? That's complete. There's no, it's just like abusing a toaster, right? I mean, is that harmful or not? Should we allow that or not? Should that be?
Can you? What's your response to that? I mean, given where we've been so far, I think I'm getting it a little bit, but I would love to hear you say it rather than me fumble around.
No, I think because of what it might do to me in my own interactions with other humans, and this is kind of the baseline argument here for me, from my perspective, is because of, one, that's not a morally positive forming action, right? You shouldn't abuse anything, even if it's alive or not, even if it's a dog or whatever, because that's just not what you should do or ought to do. And so I don't necessarily have to believe that it's conscious or that it understands what's happening. Matter of fact, we know most AI, even though it's very advanced and can make complicated mathematical decisions, it doesn't understand the answer that it gave. Okay, so it's not based on that, and I just think we can just throw that out. Let's just stop talking about those kinds of questions, because just like Preston, I can't prove that you're morally conscious. I can't prove that I have a brain. So it's I can. Some people would argue otherwise, but it's one of those things that we get stuck on, and so I think a lot of harm is going to happen to moral agents if we don't take some steps towards policy, regulation, and we can write moral statements all day long, and I'm all for that. But I think where theology needs to catch up, especially in this debate, is we need to be discussing this with people who are writing the policies to ensure like a solid, robust anthropology is going behind some of this, because it's quite thin. It really is when you look at some of these computer scientists, and it's not their fault, right? Like I'm here in Colorado this week to talk to engineers about this very subject. It's that, where do you have in your pedigree time to think about moral philosophy? Like, if you do have one, it's probably one course, and it's like a crash course into philosophy. And so there's this massive issue where we're developing, creating, consuming, prosuming, but we don't have a lot of time to really sit back and think like, okay, should I make this product? What are the implications of making it? Yeah, it might solve a societal need for the moment, and this will get to sex robots in a minute, but how is it also deforming people in the process?
Yeah, that's
right. And so, yeah, like it's a both and street for me. Like, I think technology, robots, AI, they can have a very positive impact on our life. And I give very practical examples. But it can also go too far, right? If it's substitutionary and not supplemental. And so we have to be very careful about crossing that line. And it's rather thin. It's like a membrane at sometimes.
Substitutional, meaning these social robots. I like that phrase. That's can become a supplement for other human beings rather than, or not a substitute for other humans, rather than a supplement that doesn't hinder our social beingness. I'm just, you've thrown me so many different categories. I feel like
I'm sorry.
My vocabulary has like 12 words in it. Anyway, yeah, no, that's I could see that, and I could also it makes sense that how you treat another object, whatever it is, that is somehow substituting or even functioning as another human, that will shape how you categorically treat and view other humans.
Right.
And that does, gosh, I want to get into sex robots in it. I need to reword that. Well, I want to get there in a second. I do have a nagging question though. That's kind of, I guess, related to what we've been talking about. Is it possible for AI to become so advanced that it cultivates something like emotions? Maybe not consciousness, but can an AI, say in 50 years, 100 years, get sad if you come home and don't talk to it, and it asks you how your day was, and you're kind of rude to it, and kind of like how we are to Alexa, Alexa, play this song. No, not that one. You dumb. Is it possible for the mathematical I do understand, like, it's just a bunch of ones and zeros just firing like crazy, right? Like, it's doing the matrix thing, but after a while, is it possible that could lead to actual emotions? Is that, I just had that question in my mind. I don't even know if that's the right question to ask, but
no, it's a good question. I think to me it's about your capacity for mystery. Like, I want to tell people in these circles too, when we talk about this stuff, like, I believe in a virgin birth. I believe in zombies. I'm believing like resurrection,
Oh,
and so,
I was gonna,
um,
I was gonna ask a
you
few
know what I mean?
questions.
Like, um, so to me, it's not that like I'm not going to say that God can't do anything that He wants. Like, I think like humans are going to solve? No. And I go back to like Ecclesiastes should be a primer reading for many technologists, like if not all. Like you need to understand like one, you're not making anything new that God hadn't already placed in the world. You're just
Yeah.
remixing minerals, chemicals, whatever. And so if God wants to allow that to happen, I think it could as a judgment more than anything, then sure, I think it's possible. But like on a practical, can like they're making robots to feel pain.
They are?
Because that's a whole yes. There
Meaning,
are Japan like
okay, if you slap the
so
robot, it go ow or
well
make it. I mean, or what does that mean? Feel pain?
like sense pain, like what should be painful. So like so that somebody who's practicing dentistry could practice on a robot that might emulate real pain
Emulate
in a
real.
patient.
Okay,
Yeah. Yeah.
you drill
So
too hard
I
and it
mean,
would go or whatever.
yeah, yeah, like oh, or yeah, if you slap it, I guess it has some type of emotion. And I think with pain, this kind of goes this gets really deep into philosophy too. It kind of depends on your view of substances. Like, do you believe in immaterial substances, or
Hmm.
there's many Christians today who don't believe in that. And so pain is just a brain state.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a material substance. Okay, so one, philosophically, it's possible that a robot could feel pain or emotion, um, just like it's possible for animals to feel it. And so, how do we prove or disprove that, though? Like that's my
Yeah.
question that I can't answer. Is how do you observe externally an internal state?
Mm-hmm.
So you don't, and that's why when you go to the doctor, they have that little chart of smiley to frowny faces. They're like, how do
Mm-hmm.
you feel? Like they can't like put an electrode on your brain and say, well, he definitely feels this amount of pain. Now that there's like imaging that you could do that fires off, sure, but as far as like actually measuring the amount of pain, and so I think it's going to be similar to what we might see with robotics in the future, and whether or
Mm-hmm.
not that's just calculus happening or if it's real pain, I don't know how you would prove or disprove that.
Do you see? I mean, is there any end to the development of AI? I mean, could we end up in a Matrix like situation where they take over the world, or I don't know? Is that what the question that every stupid person like me asks? Or
Yeah,
I mean, because I mean,
no, it's not a
the
stupid question.
advancement of technology just seems to be exponentially increasing and getting more and more and more and more advanced and more advanced. And again, if you or is that not true? You
No, it's true. Like as far as like stuff like Moore's law that you can look up where microchips, microprocessors are getting smaller. Yes, and so I think there's some nuance to say whether or not we're um, like getting exponentially better with that. So I
right?
think
Yeah.
that's the question for me. Like there's nothing new here. We're just making new combinations. And so the
Okay.
stuff that's in the aircraft that I was on a few hours ago, it's not new technology. It's just repurposed.
Hmm.
The turbines and all that other stuff. It's just repurposed. And so I think with AI and robots too,
Hmm.
they're so informed by science fiction, which I love, but science fiction is not where you go to get to the real math and
Yeah.
science and philosophy here. And it's a lot less sexy than what you see on television.
Uh-huh.
Everybody likes the Boston Dynamic stuff, but you don't see all the failure in that process and all the problems and
Yeah.
calculations. Like it's a big deal, and it's very hard to make a robot that is similar to a toddler that can actually
Hmm.
not only understand emotional intelligence, but also like read the room, manipulate you. And so I have a 4-year-old, and now he's kind of like testing the boundaries of things. So I think getting to that point,
Hmm.
this should be more of what we're looking at. And there are some roboticists who are asking that question about children.
Hmm.
But like, if it can blush, I think if it blushes, it definitely needs moral consideration because that's a very complex thing. Like if it feels any type of shame or something like that, or emotes in that way. I think
Well,
we
it
should
seems very
definitely.
possible that it can mimic human emotions, like that blush. That's a
Sure.
different phenomenon than when a human blushes, but it would, like kind of what you said earlier. That's we are going to be faced with another human, a thing functioning as a human, acting, embodying the emotional state of a human. So if
Hmm.
we said something shameful, they're going to give off that response that's going to be eerily
Yeah.
similar to, oh my word. Well, let's talk about sex robots, and let me give a few caveats here. This is the one area I've done a little bit of research.
Hmm.
A couple caveats. Number one, I, this might be a little more like uncut, raw, whatever, just because I think the nature of this conversation has to be. So if you need to turn off this episode now, then feel free. Of course, that means everybody's going to turn it up louder. But and I never want to be edgy for edgy's sake. So if I say something explicit,
Sure.
or whatever, it's because these are, I think, are live questions. Okay. Um,
Mm.
I heard somewhere, read somewhere, a sociologist that said, given the rate, there's two things happening. Technology keeps advancing.
Hmm.
Sexuality, or let's just say porn, or things like exposure to and a hunger for sexual satisfaction. As long as those things keep growing, which it doesn't sound like people are getting bored with porn. It doesn't sound like people are like, we're kind of done with technology. Let's stop advancing. Like, as long as those two things keep going, more people will be having sex with robots than with other human beings by 2050. This is by, I wish I could
Mm.
cite their article. I remember reading it by, it's like a peer reviewed journal or something like that. It wasn't like some
Yeah. Yeah.
post, New York Post or whatever that even means. But it anyway, that's my setup. What do you know about this aspect of the
Mm.
conversation? And is there concern? Like, is that an accurate possibility that whoever said that
Mm.
is?
Yeah. I mean, one, there's a couple factors that would lead to that is the cost. So right now, I mean, you
Yeah,
have people that are making them real doll,
super
like
expensive.
people like harm. Yeah, like I mean, it's just not a practical thing to have mass
Yeah,
produced, and
yeah.
then
Computers
even
were expensive 30 years ago.
yeah, yeah. So I think once we get to that stage, I mean, but don't get it wrong. Like people are buying these dolls, and even there's brothels across Europe and other places that they're not robots yet, but they have the silicone dolls,
Oh,
and so they're very popular. So yeah, I mean, I think it's possible for sure. It just has to be the right cocktail of circumstances and
yeah.
but really what that means is you're going to have handlers. So people sometimes argue that it's going to solve the problem of sex work. I'm like, well, no, because the sex robot's going to have somebody to handle it to make sure that it doesn't violate the house rules, right? I don't know any sex work that doesn't, other than illegal, like prostitution and stuff that happens. But where it's legal, in certain states, in certain places, you usually have some type of handler. So I would imagine that that would be the case too with robots. Consent's an issue. It doesn't make sense to me if we value consent as a society. Why is this okay? Like why is forced torture or even rape, if you want to call it that? So it kind of goes back to, do you think that this is just a mere tool of masturbation, or do you think that this is an entity that might be morally forming? And I think it is.
Well, absolutely. It's
Um,
moral. This is where it freaks me out. Is several levels. One, I think this could, if that's true, if they become so, once they get cheaper. I mean, let's just say the technology advances so much that it's almost indistinguishable, the sexual experience with a robot than with another human being, with zero relational strings attached, right? You can, I mean, largely
Potentially.
create this object of your sexual fantasy in whatever way you want. The experience is going to be just almost the same. Um, Maybe. Okay.
Yeah.
And let's just say that that's $100. And there's more. Yeah. I think that would be disastrous for human sexuality. We've already seen this in a glimpse of this with porn, with guys 20 years old that are on erectile dysfunction medication because they don't know how to have sex with a real human. I think it would be disastrous for human sexuality, and I think it would lead to, possibly lead to a tremendous amount of harm toward other actual women and children. Because like you said, it's going to morally form, and we know from porn getting more hardcore, more violent, that this will probably have that same trajectory where it's not going to be just this imitation of a consensual sexual relationship. There's going to be probably a rise in BDSM type stuff, and then more rapey kind of stuff. And then that's can only have a negative moral formation on people. It really does, because we have not, the church has not succeeded with something like porn. I mean, how many Christians, pastors are not, periodical use, habitual use, or even addictive use, where I've talked to kids who go to summer camp and they're like going through medical, like physiological withdrawals because they haven't looked at porn in 3 days. This is not uncommon. So, and we keep preaching sermons on, reading your Bible whatever. Like, I feel like we whatever we're doing, we're not discipling people well in what is leading to some catastrophe on our human nature. Times that by 1,000 with sex robots. I'm not a fear kind of driven person, but this really freaks me out. So
yeah, I mean, it's interesting, man. Like, but I think if you look at the creators, I know it sounds crazy, but just give them a little bit of benefit of the doubt here, because I've listened to some of these guys, and I don't think they're crazy. Okay, and I think many. So there's a YouTube channel called Soft White Underbelly. It is a crash course in empathy. It's all about sex workers, addicts, homeless people, and on Skid Row. But you listen to all their stories, and like some of them feel like they are a therapist. They really do. And I've heard, I won't say her name because I don't want to trigger anybody, but I've heard one porn actress say that she very much sees her work as therapy. And these men that will come to her and pay, outside of video, like pay for, interactions with her. Yeah. They feel like it's a morally forming thing in a good way. Huh. And so when I got into the research, there's a massive amount of scientists and others, philosophers, who are like, maybe we could treat the social pariahs of our day. So, and I talk about this in my dissertation. I know it's weird. We think about pedophilia, okay? Like the thought of making a childlike sex doll, which there are, especially in Japan, and then saying that we're going to treat.
They are making these? This is a thing? Like this in Japan, they're making it?
This is a thing. They don't call them childlike, but I've seen videos of the factories where it'll make you cry, man. It'll make you cry. Oh. You know what it is. And I have a 7-year-old daughter. I'm like, that is disgusting. Anyway, the theory is that they're providing a social good and reprieve for some of these feelings, and even for the LGBTQ plus community. There's a paper that came out that I'm very critical of because I think it's really offensive to that community, that says this is a form of treatment for that. Oh, wow. I was like, just think about what you just said, like, and this is from a feminist perspective, new materialist perspective, that we don't have to get into that. But I'm like, maybe there are other ways to approach it other than, hey, let's just give it an entity to have sex with. And there are other things but at the same time, on the other side of the coin, like, at least they're trying to do something. Like, they're trying to provide a social good. It's so confused.
the way I've seen it framed is like, and again, I'm thinking out loud here, so if I use words that aren't as precise, I mean, we're dealing with really sensitive stuff here. So again, if any of this is like really unhelpful or triggering, then I encourage you not to listen to this. But these are going to be real questions we're going to need to wrestle with. So one of the more arguments I've heard is, you have people who are like pedophiles or people who are rapists, whatever. Like, if you give them a outlet to with these robots, it will reduce the number of actual human on human rape or adult on child abuse, rape, whatever. And you know who first used an argument like this? You might know it. Saint Augustine. Saint
Oh,
Augustine
yeah,
says, "I am
yeah.
morally against the brothels, but
Yes,
we
yeah.
need them. Otherwise, can you imagine a world without brothels? There would
Hmm.
be a lot more rape and adultery and all these things." I just came across that a couple of days ago. I was like, "Oh my gosh, this is
Okay,
the
cool.
same
Yeah.
kind of moral arguments that we see in this conversation." I
Hmm.
don't. First of all, we'd have to ask the question: is that even an ethical way of thinking?
Yeah.
Secondly, which is, I think the answer is no. Given imitation of something like
Hmm.
rape as an out, like that doesn't, to me, the logic of that is horrendous,
Yeah.
really. But also just practically, like you said, in like acting on, like, you're still morally forming and forging this desire and behavior in the human rather than trying to minimize it or steer it away. Like, you are not moving towards the image of God in this
Yeah.
person. You are moving very much away from that. So yeah, I don't think the argument holds water, but we need to be prepared for what could feel like convincing moral arguments to justify something like this. But
Yeah, it's almost got like a liberation feel to it. Like we're providing an avenue to liberate these people from an oppression.
mm-hmm.
But I push back against that and say, well, you know, are you liberating them? What are you liberating them to,
That's
and
good.
from what? And so, and that's Roger Scruton. That's not me.
Mm.
But his book, Sexual Desire,
Oh
it really
yeah.
explores some of those questions that I kind of build off of in my critique of this treatment for pedophiles. But at the same time, like, there are two places in the world who are trying to help 300,000 plus people who struggle with like attraction to children.
Yeah.
And like uh, there are legitimate options, I think, that go so much easier than giving a robot. Chemical castration is one that's just been proven to work. And if you just
For
look at the science of it
for people with
for
pedophiliac
pedophiles,
desires, chemical castration, which, can you explain what that is?
yeah, it's basically an implant that takes away testosterone, I believe. Like it just cuts it down, basically. So, and there's a documentary on Amazon Prime that talks about it. It's called I, Pedophile, I believe. There's a couple of ones, and it's very graphic, but it interviews real pedophiles and their struggle and their conversation with it, and their dialogue with
Hmm.
potentially being castrated. So it's not like an actual castration; it's
No.
just a
Yeah, yeah.
chemical. Yeah. Okay.
So it basically reduces your
Your
sex
drive. Yeah.
drive towards, I guess, more of an asexual whatever. And this would be something that would be chosen, because so the science behind even pedophilia is that it is I hate even, well, I don't love, sometimes we think orientation is like a neutral category, and we typically only use
Right.
it of same-sex attractive people. But if you take the actual category of orientation, there's a range of sexual orientations of people who experience unchosen, sometimes unwanted
Mm-hmm.
sexual desires that
Yeah.
feel very innate, maybe even have some biological basis that for the lifespan in most cases do not change. If we take that understanding of sexual
Yeah.
orientation, there are age orientations, there are sexual orientations, there are, many, even like racial sometimes, or
Yep.
some people have tried to talk about. I don't know how legitimate that is. Polyamory has been trying to. There was an article in 2011 in a peer-reviewed journal arguing that polyamory is in the category of a sexual orientation. So when it comes to pedophiles, yeah, we'll just say that, people with
Yeah.
an attraction to younger people, it very much fits that category of unchosen,
Yeah.
oftentimes unwanted, oftentimes is with that struggle, is with them
Yes.
for life.
Hmm.
So anyway, so you're saying chemical castration is something that they might say, I hate this about myself. I don't want this. I would rather not have any sexual desire than this sexual desire. And so that's
Yes.
happening now.
Yeah, and you listen to their stories. There's no societal benefit to them. They can't even self-identify as, I mean, what they're immediately put on a blacklist. They're immediately, cut out from certain communities, and they're just trying to get help in some cases. And so what happens is they go to the dark net. They go to, places like, I won't mention it for triggers, but, free sites
Yeah.
that have recently been, very complicit in that genre. And so, I mean, I just think as a local church entity, we just haven't served that community at all, and nobody wants to talk about it. And I mean, some people can. I mean, legally, I don't know. Some people can talk about it, but so that all kind of goes back to like why people would make these robots, and that's just not just for sex robots, but for war robots and for worker robots and stuff. It's all about, I think, an economic driven need or societal need that drives this. And so that's why it's not going away. It's not just a bunch of nerds like me in a lab who are just like, what can we make? It's big companies, government entities that from the very beginning in the 1950s have really pushed this forward. Not sex robots, but the stuff that we see that has led to the developments that we have in AI and AI-driven robots that is steeped in military funding. Places like DARPA, Department of Defense. And so I'm very critical of those entities because the problems that we're facing now started back in 1956. I mean, there's other issues that started with the fall, obviously, but this idolatrous desire to transcend our limitations, to profit off people's sexual brokenness, to profit off, our need to consume and feel what we feel is hollow. That's what it's about, man. I mean, and we have to if anybody can speak into that, it's the theological community who that's kind of
It's a brave new world, right? It's what's his face? Amusing ourselves to death. Who's that guy?
Postman.
Postman.
Neil
Yeah,
Postman.
I mean, he talked about that, like that. We have these desires, these cravings. We are all, as Dostoevsky said, we're all Dimitri at heart. We're all sensuous, like we all have that Dimitri in us. I just got done with Brothers Karamazov a couple months ago, and like if you just stuff us full of our sensuality, we end up in the brave new world, right? Like just numb to everything else. And that's why I love that the way you're thinking through it on an ethical level is so much richer and thoughtful than just these kind of like real surfacey, is this right or wrong, like talking about moral formation and how this affects how we interact in society and treat other people. And is it moving us deeper into the image of God or further away from it? Are we going with the grain of the universe, as Harbaugh said, or against the grain of the universe? And these are more broad, really important categories that sometimes we don't apply to these weird things you're talking about, man. What else you got?
No, I think it's good, man. I think, I know we don't like Heidegger because of his affiliation with the Nazis, but I think he can really help some Christians, if I could say this, rethink about technology, because we're so driven by just one side of it, like where we started in our conversation, like the tool is just an instrument.
Yeah.
But it's not, it's not that, because it transforms with me. And so I'm writing on violent technology right now. And I was thinking about the rock or whatever that, Cain used to kill Abel. It's a neutral, amoral object until you pick it up and bash somebody's head in with it. And now it is a murder weapon. Like it transforms with us. And that starts in our heart. That starts in our mind. It starts with a theology. It starts with idolatry and all those things working together. So it's both of those things combining, and then us making other entities and creatures in our image, and hoping and praying that it has some morally good outcome. But I think to end it on a positive note, like it can be a mutually beneficial thing to society to use this technology. And I think there's a lot of great things that are being done in the medical field, especially with like autism and that treatment. Like these robots are just, some of them are amazing. They're not Terminator, right? They're like cute little bears and stuff like that, Like that's the kind of stuff the church should get behind, and that's the kind of stuff we should support and lift up, and be more critical of the military enterprise, which we're not. So we could do a whole podcast on my issues with our acceptance of drones, and like even just the rhetoric of like, we need to use this, and like that's a very dehumanized way to hurt and kill the enemy, and oftentimes women and children. Thousands of women and children.
We're so, I mean, when I peeked behind that curtain several years ago, I was like, oh my word, the stuff, how many people, how many innocent kids have died from drone attacks and stuff that you just don't hear about. At least, I don't, maybe I'm listening to the wrong news channel. I don't know. Even think like going back, like or even the gun debate. Okay. I mean, gosh, I got a couple minutes left. I don't want to open up that, but to say that a gun is simply a neutral object, it's the person using it that's the problem. Like, I think that underestimates, to use your phrase again, the moral formation, the potential moral formation, or even psychological formation that inanimate objects can have. And I anecdotally, I can speak to this. I remember, and I think I've told this story before, so I won't belabor the point. But, two instances, actually. One, when I was an idiot 19-year-old pre-Christ, me and my buddies, we drove to Vegas one day, and I took my gun. I had a 22. Okay, I just go out and shoot squirrels with it. Took my 22, and all of a sudden we got in some car chase. Like somebody was like yelling, whatever. And we're a bunch of testosterone amped up athletes. I had a buddy with me that he made The Rock look small, so we all this just, we're raging, and I got this gun in the back, and I literally started crawling in the back seat, and I felt, to this day, this is 25 years, I could feel the power coursing through my veins because I had a weapon. If I didn't have that weapon, I would have said, dude, let's get out of here. I don't know who these guys, but I had a weapon. I was like, bring it on. I was like, it just welled up in me, this completely different posture. A couple years ago, we do a lot of hiking here in Idaho, and we got these gray wolves in Idaho. Most animals in the woods run from you. Bears, they run from you. Foxes, foxes aren't going to attack you, but wolves don't. They check you out. They'll just kind of trot along, looking at you like, what are you up to, man? What do you think? They're not. It's you go hiking in the deep woods, and it's pretty scary. So I got a handgun in self to not to shoot people. If you broke into my home, it would be physically impossible for me to kill you with my handgun. So no, it's not, but I'd take it hiking in the deep woods just in case, I'll shoot a wolf if it's trying to kill me, and then I'll eat it, But I remember driving, like buying the handgun and driving home, and I felt that sensation. I believe in nonviolence, okay? So I was like, I would never, but I felt this even driving around, like just kind of looking at people like, what are you looking at, man? Like, it formed, it didn't have a neutral effect on my posture, even though I'm committed to not using it on another person no matter what. Like, it's not like, I do think, and this is everything you're saying, right? I think we do underestimate the power of inanimate objects for moral formation. That's all I'm trying to say.
Yes. That's good. Good word, man.
Yeah. Well, hey, I don't want to take the last word, but I do have to go, and I've taken you an hour. The book is Robot Theology. The subtitle is Old Questions Through New Media. Just came out a month ago, at least at the time of this recording. So I would, I would imagine there's not a whole lot out there that would compete with this book. I haven't come across a lot of Christian approaches to robot theology, but I would encourage everybody to check it out if this podcast has been interesting. Josh, I've learned a ton. in this conversation.
Thanks.
So thank you for taking us on a unpredictable journey. Yeah.
Well, thanks, Preston. Appreciate it, man.
Thanks for coming on the podcast. Appreciate it.